The massive testing room on Kepler Station was filled with creatures from across the galaxy. Jake Morrison stood straight in his best uniform, trying not to let his nerves show. Next to him, Amy Carter checked her rifle one more time. Both humans knew this was their one chance to prove that Earth deserved a place in the Galactic Military Alliance. The alien delegates sat in raised viewing boxes, looking down at the humans like they were watching animals at a zoo. Admiral Zekthari was the biggest and most important of them all. His reptile-like skin kept changing colors, and right now it was bright purple. Jake had learned that purple meant the alien was amused. That was not a good sign. So these are the humans who think they can fight alongside real warriors, Admiral Zekthari said, his voice booming across the room. Several other aliens made clicking and hissing sounds that Jake guessed were laughter. The testing room was huge, stretching out further than Jake could see clearly. Targets appeared in the air using advanced technology that humans had only dreamed about. The first targets were simple circles that hung in the air without moving. They were placed at different distances to test how well the humans could shoot. Captain Danny Wells, the human military officer in charge of this whole mess, cleared his throat. Our shooters are ready to begin the standard test. An insect-like alien with too many eyes made a buzzing sound. This will be fun to watch. These humans still use their eyes to aim. They have not even learned to let machines do the aiming for them. Jake felt his face get hot with embarrassment, but he kept his mouth shut. Everyone in the room knew that human technology was hundreds of years behind the aliens. Their weapons shot simple metal bullets, while the aliens used energy beams that never missed. But this was the test they had to pass if Earth wanted to join the Alliance. The first target appeared 100 meters away. It was a perfect circle, bright red against the gray wall. Jake lifted his rifle and looked through the scope. He could feel dozens of alien eyes watching him. His hands started to shake a little from the pressure. Jake took a deep breath and tried to remember his training. He lined up the crosshairs on the center of the target and slowly squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against his shoulder, and the bullet flew toward the target. It missed by 3 meters. The sound of alien laughter filled the room. Admiral Zekthari's skin turned bright orange, which Jake now knew meant he was very amused. Perhaps they need the target closer, maybe 5 meters away. Jake's face burned with shame, but he stepped back to let Amy take her turn. She raised her rifle with steady hands and took careful aim. Her shot was better than his, but it still missed the center by a wide margin. More laughter echoed through the room. The aliens were not even trying to hide how funny they thought this was. Some of them were pointing at the humans and making sounds that were clearly jokes in their own languages. A few had stopped watching entirely, as if the humans were too boring to bother with. The targets moved farther away. 500 meters. Then 1,000 meters. Each shot the humans took seemed to get worse. Their bullets went wide, fell short, or flew over the targets completely. By the time they reached the longest distances, Jake and Amy were only hitting about 1 target out of every 3 shots. Dr. Ven Carey, a tall, thin alien with gray skin and huge black eyes, was taking notes on a device that glowed in her hands. "Very interesting," she said to the alien next to her. "Their brains show lots of activity when they aim, but their bodies cannot do what their minds want them to do." The other aliens nodded in agreement. It was clear that humans were just not built for this kind of work. Their hands shook, their eyes were not sharp enough, and their reflexes were too slow. Every other species in the galaxy had either evolved better senses or had learned to use computers to help them aim. The moving targets were even worse. When circles started flying through the air in straight lines, Jake and Amy could barely hit any of them. The targets moved in patterns that should have been easy to predict, but somehow the humans kept shooting at the wrong spots. An alien that looked like a walking tree made a sound like wind through leaves. Jake thought it might be laughing. "They are shooting at where the target was, not where it is going," the tree alien said. "Do they not understand that moving objects change position?" By the end of the test, Jake felt like he wanted to disappear. Out of 50 targets, he had hit maybe 15. Amy had done a little better, but not by much. None of their hits would have been good enough to pass even the most basic military test on Earth, let alone meet galactic standards. Admiral Zekthari stood up from his viewing box. His skin was now a mix of orange and yellow, showing that he was both amused and slightly bored. "I think we have seen enough," he announced. "The humans are brave, I will give them that. But they are simply not capable of the kind of precision that modern warfare requires." He looked down at Jake and Amy with what might have been pity. "Perhaps in a few thousand years, when your species has evolved better reflexes, you might be ready to fight alongside the rest of us. For now, I suggest you focus on activities more suited to your abilities." The other aliens made various sounds of agreement. They began filing out of the room, already talking among themselves about other matters. The human demonstration had been so bad that it was not even worth discussing. Jake felt completely defeated. This had been Earth's one chance to join the galactic community as equals, and they had failed spectacularly. He looked over at Amy, expecting to see the same disappointment in her eyes. Instead, she was smiling slightly. Captain Wells walked over to them as the last of the aliens left the viewing area. Jake expected him to be angry or at least frustrated. Instead, the captain looked remarkably calm. "Well, that went about as expected," Wells said quietly. Jake stared at him. "Sir, we just embarrassed our entire species in front of the galaxy's military leaders." Wells checked to make sure all the aliens were gone, then allowed himself a small smile. "Did we, or did we just show them exactly what they expected to see?" Amy nodded. "The test was designed for their kind of shooting, not ours. They wanted to see us fail at being like them." Jake was confused. "But we did fail. We could barely hit anything." "That's because we were aiming at the wrong targets," Amy explained. "Those targets were not moving like real enemies move. They were too predictable, too simple." Captain Wells put a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Son, you've been trained to hunt moving targets in 3 dimensions. You've learned to shoot at enemies that are trying to kill you, not at circles hanging in the air. Your brain is wired for real combat, not target practice." Jake was starting to understand, but he still felt confused. "So what happens now?" Wells looked toward the door where the aliens had left. "Now we wait. Real combat has a way of teaching lessons that target practice never can." The 3 humans left the testing room together. Behind them, the holographic targets flickered off one by one, leaving the huge space empty and dark. None of them knew that within a few months, everything would change. The aliens who had laughed at them today would soon be begging to learn their secrets, but that was still in the future. For now, they walked through the corridors of Kepler Station, past aliens who whispered and pointed at the humans, who could not even hit a simple target. They had no idea that they had been aiming at the wrong thing all along. 3 months had passed since the embarrassing test on Kepler Station. Jake Morrison was back on Earth, training new recruits at the military base in Colorado. He tried not to think about that day when the entire galaxy had laughed at humanity's shooting skills. But then the reports started coming in. The first message came from a cargo ship captain named Bill Hayes. His freighter had been carrying medical supplies to a colony world when pirates attacked. Bill's crew had only basic weapons, nothing fancy, like the aliens used. But somehow, they had fought off 12 pirate ships without losing a single person. "I don't understand it myself," Bill told Jake over the video call. "My gunners were shooting all over the place, missing everything. But then the pirates started flying right into our bullets. It was like they wanted to get hit." Jake listened to more stories like this. Human cargo ships were defending themselves against pirates who had been terrorizing the galaxy for years. The strange thing was, none of the human captains could explain exactly how they were winning these fights. The reports reached Admiral Zekthari on his flagship deep in Valonian space. He was reading the latest incident report when his aide, a younger Valonian named Zekmori, brought him another stack of files. "Sir, we have 17 more reports of human vessels successfully defending against pirate attacks," Zekmori said. "The pattern is always the same. The humans appear to miss their targets, but somehow the pirates are destroyed anyway. Admiral Zekthari's scales shifted to a dark blue color, which meant he was thinking hard. He had commanded fleets for over 200 years and had never seen anything like this. Show me the sensor recordings from the latest attack. The holographic display showed a human cargo ship being attacked by 8 pirate fighters. The ship was called Denver's Pride, and it looked old and beaten up compared to the sleek pirate vessels. When the shooting started, the human gunners fired their simple metal bullets in what looked like random directions. "Look at this," Admiral Zekthari pointed at the display. "The humans are shooting at empty space. Their targeting is even worse than we saw during the test." But as they watched, something incredible happened. The pirate ships began moving into the exact spots where the human bullets were flying. One by one, the pirates flew directly into the paths of projectiles that had been fired seconds earlier. Within minutes, 7 of the 8 attackers were destroyed. The last one fled in panic. "How is this possible?" Zekmori asked. "Are the humans using some kind of mind control device?" Admiral Zekthari studied the recording again and again. The human shots had seemed random, but the results were anything but random. It was as if the humans had known exactly where each pirate ship would be before the pilots themselves knew. Similar reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Human merchant ships were winning battles against overwhelming odds. Pirate crews who survived these encounters told wild stories about human gunners who could predict the future. Dr. Venkari was working late in her laboratory on the research station orbiting Proxima Centauri. She had been studying the brain patterns of different species for over 30 years, but the human data was unlike anything she had ever seen. "Computer, show me the human neural activity during high-stress situations," she said to her AI assistant. The holographic brain appeared in front of her, glowing with electrical activity. During moments of danger, the human brain lit up like a star, but the patterns were not what she expected to see. "Fascinating," she whispered to herself. "They are not calculating where to shoot. They are predicting where the target will be." She had studied the brains of dozens of species, and they all worked the same way when aiming weapons. They identified the target, calculated the distance and speed, then fired at the exact spot where the target currently was. Their computers helped with the math to make sure the shots were accurate, but humans were different. Their brains were doing something that should have been impossible. Instead of aiming at where something was, they were aiming at where it was going to be. And somehow, they were almost always right. Dr. Venkari called an emergency meeting of the Galactic Science Council. Scientists from 12 different worlds gathered in the virtual meeting space, their holographic forms flickering as they connected from across the galaxy. "I have discovered something that changes everything we thought we knew about human combat abilities," she announced. "They do not aim the way we do." She showed them the brain scans and explained what she had found. The other scientists were skeptical at first. The idea that a primitive species could outperform advanced computer systems seemed ridiculous. "But how can biological systems predict movement better than our computers?" asked Dr. Veltron, a scientist from the crystal-based ethereal collective. "Our machines can calculate millions of possibilities in seconds." "Because humans are not calculating," Dr. Venkari explained. "They are feeling. Their brains have been shaped by millions of years of hunting animals that tried to escape. They learn to sense patterns in movement that our computers cannot see." She showed them recordings of ancient human hunters on Earth, thousands of years ago. Humans had to kill fast-moving animals to survive. They could not waste arrows or spears, so they learned to shoot where the animal would be, not where it was. Their entire species evolved to predict the future movement of their targets, she continued. "When we gave them stationary targets during the test, we were asking them to ignore millions of years of evolution. The implications were staggering. Every advanced species in the galaxy had long ago abandoned biological aiming in favor of computer assistance. They had assumed that artificial intelligence was superior to organic brains in every way, but the humans had kept their ancient hunting instincts. While other species relied on machines to calculate trajectories, Humans used intuition and pattern recognition that had been refined over countless generations. Admiral Zekthari was called to attend the emergency session via hologram. His scales were cycling through several colors as he processed the information. "You are telling me that the humans who could not hit stationary targets can somehow predict where moving targets will be?" he asked. "Not predict in the way you mean," Dr. Venkari corrected. "They sense it. Their brains recognize patterns in movement and timing that are invisible to our analytical systems." She showed them a comparison test. The galaxy's most advanced targeting computer was given a scenario with 30 objects moving in random patterns. The computer achieved a hit rate of 18%. Then she showed the same test performed by human volunteers using their primitive weapons. They achieved a hit rate of 62%. The meeting hall fell silent. For the first time in galactic history, a primitive biological system had outperformed the most advanced technology available. Colonel Jake Morrison was called to testify before the emergency council. He appeared as a hologram, still wearing his simple Earth military uniform. The beings who had mocked him months earlier now listened to every word with intense attention. "Can you explain how your species developed this ability?" Admiral Zekthari asked, his scales showing the deep purple of respectful curiosity. Jake thought for a moment before answering. "We have always been hunters," he said simply. "For thousands and thousands of years, if we could not catch fast animals, we died. So our minds learned to see where things were going, not just where they were." "But surely your computer systems are more accurate than biological targeting," suggested another alien delegate. "For some things, yes," Jake agreed. "If you want to hit something that is not moving or something that moves in a straight line, computers are better. But real combat is not like that. In real fighting, everything is moving and changing all the time." He paused and looked around at the assembled aliens. "During your test, your targets moved in patterns that our computers could easily track. But our brains kept trying to predict more complex movements that were not there. We were aiming for where we thought the targets should go, not where they actually went." The council members exchanged glances. They were beginning to understand that what they had seen as human weakness was actually a strength that no other species possessed. The session ended with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. The humans who had failed so badly at target practice were somehow winning real battles. Against overwhelming odds, the galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most advanced technology was no match for ancient instincts. The war room on the neutral station, New Geneva, was bigger than any meeting room Jake Morrison had ever seen. For the first time in his life, he was sitting at the same table as the galaxy's most powerful military leaders. 6 months ago, these same beings had laughed at him. Now they were asking for his help. Admiral Zekthari's scales were a steady green color, which Jake had learned meant respect. The big reptilian alien was studying holographic displays that showed pirate attacks. Across the galaxy, the numbers were getting worse every day. "The Crimson Fleet has become bolder," Admiral Zekthari said. "They are no longer just attacking cargo ships. Last week, they hit 3 colony worlds and destroyed a military patrol." Captain Danny Wells nodded from his seat across the table. "Our intelligence says they have over 200 ships now. They're using a hidden base in the Vega system that's supposed to be impossible to attack." Dr. Venkari activated a 3-dimensional map that showed the entire Vega system. In the center was a massive space fortress surrounded by defensive platforms and weapon satellites. It looked like a metal moon covered in guns. "The fortress has shields that can stop our most powerful weapons," she explained. "The pirates chose this location because no fleet has ever successfully attacked it. Our computer models show that any assault would result in 70% casualties or higher." Jake studied the holographic fortress. It was covered in automated defense systems that could track and destroy incoming ships from thousands of miles away. The weapons moved in predictable patterns, scanning space in overlapping circles that left no safe approach route. "What if we don't attack it the way your computers expect?" Jake asked. The alien officers looked at him with confusion. Admiral Zekthari's scales shifted to a lighter shade of green. What do you mean? Amy Carter, who was now a lieutenant colonel, stood up and pointed at the fortress display. All of these defenses are designed to stop logical attacks. They expect enemy ships to come from the most efficient directions and follow the best tactical approaches. She touched the hologram and it zoomed in on the defensive weapons. But what if we attack from 17 different directions at the same time, with each group following flight paths that look random? The alien commander stared at her like she had suggested attacking with paper airplanes. A tall insect-like alien named Commander Crixwell made a clicking sound that Jake recognized as disapproval. Random attacks violate every principle of military strategy, Commander Crixwell said. Coordinated assaults require precise timing and predetermined objectives. Your suggestion is organized chaos. Exactly, Jake said with a smile. Organized chaos is what humans do best. He stood up and walked around the table to the holographic display. Your defensive computers are programmed to fight enemies that think like you do. They expect logical attacks from predictable directions. When we come at them from everywhere at once, following flight paths that seem random, their computers won't know how to prioritize targets. Admiral Zekthari was quiet for a long moment, his scales cycling through different shades of green and blue. You want to use 17 separate attack groups with no central coordination? Not no coordination, Amy corrected. Different coordination. Each pilot understands the main objective and has the freedom to adapt based on what they see happening around them. The concept was difficult for the alien commanders to understand. Their military traditions were built on rigid command structures and detailed battle plans. The idea of giving individual pilots the freedom to make tactical decisions seemed like a recipe for disaster. Dr. Venkari had been studying the fortress defenses on her personal device. There is some logic to their proposal, she said slowly. The defensive systems are designed to counter threats that follow established patterns. If the attack patterns are truly unpredictable, the computers may struggle to respond effectively. But how do you coordinate 17 different groups without central command? Asked Commander Velthrin of the Arcturian Defense Force. How do you ensure they don't accidentally attack each other? Jake had been expecting this question. The same way a pack of wolves coordinates when hunting a large animal. They all understand the goal, they all watch what the others are doing, and they all adapt their approach based on the situation. Wolves? Admiral Zekthari's scales shifted to yellow, indicating confusion. Predators from Earth, Amy explained. They hunt in groups, but they don't have a single leader giving orders. Each Wolf reads the situation and responds in the way that best helps the pack succeed. She activated another display that showed recordings of human fighter pilots during training exercises. Our pilots have been practicing this kind of flexible formation flying for months. They can coordinate with each other without radio communication, just by watching how the others move. The alien officers watched the human fighters weave through complex maneuvers that looked like an elaborate dance. The ships moved in patterns that seemed random but somehow avoided collisions while maintaining an overall formation structure. Remarkable, Dr. Venkari murmured. They are processing multiple variables simultaneously and making real-time adjustments based on visual cues alone. The debate continued for hours. The alien commanders were skeptical, but the numbers didn't lie. Human vessels had been consistently winning battles against superior forces by using tactics that defied conventional military logic. Finally, Admiral Zekthari made the decision. We will attempt your strategy, but I want to understand exactly how these human formations work before we risk hundreds of lives. The next week was spent in intensive training. Human pilots worked alongside alien squadron leaders, teaching them the basics of adaptive formation flying. It was frustrating for both sides. The aliens were used to following precise flight plans, while the humans were used to making split-second decisions based on intuition. Commander Lisa Parker, who had been assigned to lead the human tactical team, worked directly with Admiral Zekthari to develop the attack plan. She had to explain concepts that seemed obvious to humans but were foreign to alien military thinking. "The key is not to think of it as chaos," she told the Admiral during one of their planning sessions. "Think of it as controlled flexibility. Each pilot has guidelines, not orders. They know the overall objective and they have the freedom to achieve it in whatever way seems best." "But what if they make wrong decisions?" Admiral Zekthari asked, his scales showing the orange color of concern. "Then they adapt and try something else," Lisa replied simply. "Humans are good at recovering from mistakes because we expect things to go wrong. Your species plans for success, we plan for problems." The final assault plan was unlike anything in galactic military history. Instead of massive battle groups following predetermined attack routes, the force would consist of small, flexible units that could change their approach based on real-time conditions. Jake found himself assigned to lead one of the human strike teams. As he sat in the cockpit of his fighter, waiting for the signal to begin the attack, he thought about how much had changed since that embarrassing day on Kepler Station 6 months ago. The galaxy had laughed at human shooting skills. Now they were betting the success of their most important military operation on human tactical thinking. "All units, this is Admiral Zekthari," came the voice over the communication system. "Remember, we are not just attacking a fortress today. We are testing a new way of thinking about warfare itself." Jake checked his weapons one final time. They were still the same simple kinetic projectiles that had been mocked during the marksmanship test. But now he understood that hitting the target was not always the point. Sometimes the real target was the system that made the target work. "Human strike teams, begin your approach," came the order. Jake pushed his fighter forward into space, followed by 16 other small groups of ships. To any observer, their flight paths would look completely random. But Jake could see the pattern that connected all of them. They were not attacking the fortress. They were attacking the fortress's ability to think. The space around the Crimson Fleet fortress looked like a graveyard of metal and rock. Broken asteroids floated between the defensive platforms, creating a maze that any attacking fleet would have to navigate. Jake Morrison checked his instruments one more time as his fighter approached the outer edge of the asteroid field. "Remember," came Lisa Parker's voice over the communication channel, "we're not trying to destroy the fortress. We're trying to confuse it." Jake could see the massive structure ahead, bristling with weapons that could vaporize his small fighter in seconds. The fortress was the size of a small moon, covered in armor plating and defensive shields. Hundreds of automated guns tracked back and forth across space. Searching for threats, Admiral Zekthari's main battle fleet was already engaged on the far side of the fortress. Bright flashes of energy weapons lit up the darkness as the traditional forces attacked according to standard galactic military doctrine. The fortress defenses were responding exactly as expected, concentrating firepower on the most obvious threats. "Phase 1 is working," Admiral Zekthari reported. "The fortress computers are focusing on our main assault. Human strike teams, you are clear to begin your approach." Jake pushed his fighter forward, following a flight path that looked completely random to anyone watching. Around him, 16 other small groups of human ships began weaving through the asteroid field from different directions. To the fortress computers, they must have looked like scattered debris or lost cargo ships. The first indication that something was different came when Jake's targeting system locked onto a communication relay instead of a weapon platform. His training told him this was wrong. Military doctrine said you should always attack the biggest threats first. But his human instincts told him something else. He fired 3 shots at the small communication dish. The bullets struck precisely, severing connections and sending the relay spinning into space. It was not a dramatic explosion, just a small piece of equipment that stopped working. Across the battlefield, other human pilots were doing the same thing. They ignored the massive gun batteries and shield generators that the fortress computers expected them to target. Instead, they attacked sensor arrays, communication lines, and power conduits that seemed unimportant. Amy Carter was leading another strike group through a narrow canyon between 2 large asteroids. Her target was a cluster of small antennas. that most military planners would have considered worthless. She fired a careful burst that destroyed 3 of them in sequence. Target the nervous system, not the muscles, she muttered to herself, remembering Jake's explanation of human tactical thinking. The fortress defenses were designed to protect against logical attacks. The most dangerous weapons were heavily shielded and surrounded by point defense systems. But the fortress computers had not been programmed to protect every small component with the same intensity. Within minutes, the human strike teams had destroyed dozens of seemingly minor targets scattered across the fortress surface. None of these attacks would have impressed a military observer. They were small, precise strikes against components that did not seem important, but the cumulative effect was devastating. Commander Rick Stone was piloting his fighter through a field of defensive satellites when he noticed that their tracking was becoming erratic. The automated guns that should have been firing at him were pointing in random directions, as if they could no longer tell where he was. "The sensors are going down," he reported. "They're losing track of us." Dr. Van Carey was monitoring the battle from Admiral Zekthari's command ship. Her instruments showed the fortress's defensive network beginning to fail in ways that should have been impossible. "Fascinating," she said to herself. "They are not destroying the fortress. They are lobotomizing it." The fortress had been designed as an integrated system where every component shared information with every other component. The weapons talked to the sensors talked to the computers, and the computers coordinated the entire defense. It was an incredibly sophisticated network that could respond to multiple threats simultaneously, but the humans were systematically cutting the connections between these systems. Without communication links, the powerful weapons could not receive targeting data. Without sensor networks, the computers could not track incoming threats. Without coordination, the entire defense became a collection of isolated parts that could not work together. Jake was approaching his primary target when he saw something that made him smile. A massive plasma cannon, capable of destroying an entire fleet, was spinning slowly in circles. Its targeting computer was trying to track threats that its sensors could no longer see. He fired a single shot at the cannon's power coupling. The weapon went dark. "This is too easy," came Amy's voice over the radio. "It's like the whole fortress is blind and deaf." Admiral Zekthari was watching the battle displays with amazement. His scales had turned a bright blue color that indicated profound surprise. The fortress that had been considered impregnable just an hour ago was now defenseless. "How is this possible?" he asked Dr. Van Carey. "The humans have destroyed perhaps 50 small targets. The fortress should still have 90% of its defensive capability." "But those 50 targets were the right targets," she replied. "They have eliminated the fortress's ability to function as a coordinated system. Each weapon is now operating independently, without central guidance." The pirate crews inside the fortress were experiencing their own confusion. Their command center was receiving contradictory reports from different sections. Some areas reported heavy attacks while others showed no enemy activity at all. The defensive computers kept giving conflicting orders as they tried to coordinate responses based on incomplete information. Captain Rex Volkov, the Crimson Fleet commander, was shouting orders that no one could follow because the communication systems were no longer working properly. His tactical displays showed dozens of enemy contacts that appeared and disappeared randomly as the sensor network failed. "Where are they attacking from?" he demanded. "The computers keep changing the threat assessment." His lieutenant, a nervous man named P. Cross, was trying to make sense of the chaos. "Sir, it looks like they're hitting us from 17 different directions at once. But none of the attacks are following normal patterns." "That's impossible," Volkov snapped. "No fleet can coordinate that many separate assault groups without central command." But that was exactly what the humans were doing. Each strike team was operating independently while maintaining awareness of the overall objective. They could see what the other groups were doing and adapted their own attacks to complement the larger pattern. Jake's group had finished their assigned targets and was looking for new opportunities. He could see that Amy's team had successfully disabled the fortress's long-range sensors. which meant the defensive computers could no longer track threats beyond a few kilometers. "Strike Team 7, this is Strike Team 3, he called to another. "Human group, the East Sector sensors are down. You have a clear approach to the power distribution center." "Copy that, Strike Team 3, we see the opening." This kind of real-time coordination was impossible for species that relied on rigid command structures. The alien battle groups needed explicit orders from their commanders before they could change their objectives. But the human teams could adapt their plans based on opportunities that developed during the battle, within 30 minutes of beginning their attack. The human strike teams had effectively neutralized the most powerful fortress in the galaxy. They had not destroyed it in any dramatic way. They had simply made it unable to function. Admiral Zekthari ordered his main fleet to advance. The fortress weapons that should have annihilated them hung silent and powerless. The pirates who had thought themselves safe behind impregnable defenses found themselves defenseless against a force they could no longer track or coordinate against. "All human strike teams, this is Admiral Zekthari," came the message. "Withdraw to safe distance. We will handle the final phase." Jake pulled his fighter back and watched as the galactic fleet moved in to capture the fortress. The pirates surrendered. Without firing another shot, the battle was over, but Jake knew that something much bigger had changed. The galaxy would never think about warfare the same way again. 1 year after the battle at Vega, Jake Morrison stood in a classroom on Tau Ceti Prime, looking out at the strangest group of students he had ever seen. The Galactic Military Academy had been training officers for over 1,000 years, but never before had they asked a human to teach their most advanced course. In the front row sat Admiral Zekthari, his scales showing the steady blue color of deep concentration. The proud Valonian had given up his fleet command to study at the academy, something no one thought they would ever see. Next to him was Commander Crixvel, the insect-like alien who had once called human tactics organized chaos. "Today we're going to talk about why the target doesn't matter." Jake began, activating the holographic display behind him. "Everything in combat is connected. When you understand the connections, you can change the whole system by touching the right spots." The display showed 2 fleets facing each other in space. One fleet followed traditional galactic tactics, focusing their firepower on the enemy's biggest and most dangerous ships. The simulation played out exactly as military computers had predicted for centuries. Both sides would take heavy casualties, and victory would go to whoever could absorb the most damage. "Now watch the same battle with human tactics," Jake said. Restarting the simulation, this time, one fleet began attacking what looked like random targets. Instead of going after the enemy battleships, they hit supply vessels, communication relays, and support craft. The effect was dramatic. The opposing fleet gradually lost the ability to coordinate their attacks and fight as a unified force. "You're not trying to destroy the enemy," Jake explained. "You're trying to break their ability to work together." The concept had spread far beyond military applications. Human diplomats were solving galactic disputes by understanding the hidden relationships between different factions instead of just listening to their official positions. Human traders were making enormous profits by predicting market changes that even the most advanced economic computers missed. Dr. Venkari had established the first research center dedicated to studying human cognitive patterns. Her latest paper had been downloaded by scientists across the galaxy, all trying to understand how human brains could solve problems that required massive computational power when approached with traditional methods. "The human mind is essentially a pattern recognition machine," she explained to a gathering of the galaxy's leading researchers. "They don't solve problems the way we do. They recognize when they've seen similar patterns before and adapt solutions that worked in the past." The changes were creating tension in the galactic power structure. Species that had dominated through superior technology found themselves at a disadvantage when dealing with opponents who could adapt and improvise. The rigid hierarchies that had maintained peace for thousands of years were starting to show cracks. Captain Danny Wells, now serving as Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Council, addressed these concerns during his opening speech to the full assembly. The chamber was packed with delegates from hundreds of worlds, many of whom still seemed nervous about dealing with human unpredictability. "We're not here to replace your systems," Wells assured them. "We're here to work with them. Our species has learned that the best results come from combining careful analysis with the ability to adapt when things change." The truth of his words was proven every day. Joint operations that included human advisors had success rates that were 30% higher than traditional missions. More importantly, they achieved these results with significantly fewer casualties. The Crimson Fleet had been completely destroyed as an organization. The few pirates who survived had either been captured or had given up piracy entirely. They could not fight against tactics that seemed to predict their every move. Other criminal organizations had learned from the Crimson Fleet's fate and avoided areas where humans were present, but the most important change was in how the galaxy thought about conflict itself. Military academies across the galaxy were teaching courses in adaptive tactics and systems thinking. Young officers from species that had fought the same way for millennia were learning to see warfare as a complex web of relationships rather than a simple contest of firepower. Amy Carter, now commanding her own task force, had become something of a celebrity in military circles. Her success in predicting enemy behavior had made her one of the most sought-after tactical advisors in the galaxy. But she remained modest about her abilities. "It's not magic," she told a reporter during a recent interview. "We just learned to see that everything is connected. When you understand how the connections work, you can influence the whole system by changing the right parts." The reporter, a crystalline being from the ethereal collective, had trouble understanding the concept. "But how do you know which parts to change?" "Experience," Amy replied simply. "Thousands of years of hunting and fighting taught us to recognize patterns. We don't think about it consciously. We just feel when something is about to change." Jake finished his lecture and watched as his alien students filed out of the classroom. They were still struggling with concepts that seemed natural to humans, but they were learning. The galaxy was slowly adapting to the idea that there were other ways to solve problems besides computational analysis. Admiral Zekthari stayed after the other students had left. His scales were showing the deep green of respectful curiosity. "Professor Morrison, may I ask you something?" "Of course, Admiral. What's on your mind?" "During that first test on Kepler Station, when your species performed so poorly, did you know that you were demonstrating the wrong skills?" Jake smiled, remembering that humiliating day when the entire galaxy had laughed at human marksmanship. "We knew we were being tested on something that didn't matter. Your targets weren't acting like real enemies. They were too predictable, too simple." "But you didn't protest or ask for different targets?" "Because we knew that real combat would teach the lessons that target practice couldn't," Jake replied. "We just had to wait for the right opportunity to show what humans could really do." Admiral Zekthari's scales shifted to bright blue, indicating amazement. "You were already planning for battles that hadn't happened yet." "That's what humans do," Jake said. "We think about possibilities, not just realities. When you tested our ability to hit stationary targets, we were already thinking about how to fight moving enemies in chaotic situations." The Admiral left the classroom with much to think about. Outside the academy, the galaxy was continuing to change in ways that no one had predicted. Human influence was spreading not through conquest or superior technology, but through new ways of thinking about old problems. The species that had once laughed at human aiming skills were now sending their best officers to learn from human instructors. They had discovered that in a universe full of chaos and complexity, the ability to find patterns and predict outcomes was more valuable than any weapon. Jake walked to his office window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, human cargo ships were traveling safely through sectors that had once been controlled by pirates. Human diplomats were solving disputes that had lasted for centuries. Human traders were building prosperity by understanding connections that others missed. The galaxy had laughed at how humans aimed, thinking that their poor performance with stationary targets proved they were inferior warriors. They had failed to understand that humans weren't aiming at targets. They were aiming at the future. The target had never mattered. What mattered was understanding that everything was connected, and that by touching the right connections, you could change everything. In the end, humanity had taught the galaxy the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest strength looks like weakness until you understand what it's really for.